Because even I think like I had listened to all your videos, I listened to the pro videos, and you still don't get it really.
Right.
Like you're still so stuck in your old way of thinking and studying, and so it really does take, like, in the beginning, pay close attention to what the process should be. If I could tell anybody listening to this, listen closely to the instruction, and then build your daily process so it reflects what he recommends, and tailor it to how you study, but then like just commit to it, and don't stress about like if everything's perfect. Just go. And then like 2 or 3 weeks in, like we're saying, you're going to figure out like, oh, okay, I know what we're doing here. I can adjust, but for the most part, just commit and don't overthink it. I think that's important, because you're not going to get it right away. It's
Welcome to episode 108 of the CPA Exam Experience podcast from SuperfastCPA. I'm Nate, and in today's interview, you're going to hear me talk with Torre. So you will find Torre's study experience very relatable, because even as he started with SuperfastCPA, he had some of the most common concerns or common obstacles that people run into even with our study process. Because for a lot of people, one of the main things I hear is that it's very hard for them to go straight to the questions and go through a lesson and, score really low, because of course it's your first time seeing the questions, and going straight into the questions, of course, you're not going to be scoring very high. And, even though in like the pro videos and in the free training, we explain that as, you're just using the questions for a lesson as a learning tool, just like you would the video lecture or the chapter. If you start watching a video lecture, you don't have any notion of, well, how am I doing on this video lecture? Or if you read the chapter, you wouldn't think, how am I doing on reading this chapter? You're just using it as a learning tool, so you're open to learning whatever it is you're reading or watching. And so the mindset shift is just that you're using the questions as an even more direct path to exactly what you need to know for exam day. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The other thing that you'll really like about Torre's interview, or his story, is as we start talking about the different strategies, he kind of has this philosophical way of explaining the different study strategies. And I'll leave it at that for now, but you'll see what I'm talking about, which is to say, I think he makes them very understandable or very relatable. So before we get into the interview with Torre, I just want to mention two things. First, the free study training webinars. That is the place that you should start. If you've never watched one of those, that is the best hour that you can invest in your CPA study process, unless you've already mastered the CPA study process. So that's a free webinar that we will walk through our core strategies so that you can see, okay, does this logically make sense to me? And by the end, you will see how this can save you so much time and effort and energy and frustration. So to sign up for one of those trainings, go to our homepage at SuperfastCPA.com, or the link will be down in the description of this episode. The second thing is our free podcast giveaway. So each month we give away 3 pairs of Powerbeat Pro headphones to 3 random listeners who have entered the giveaway. It's just your name and email. And that link also will be down in the description of this episode. So with that out of the way, let's get into this interview with Torre. Have you listened to many of these interviews? You kind of know how they go?
Yeah, I have. I when I was going through the studying process, I think I listened to every podcast that was available. So yeah, you're kind of looking for like, how'd you come across us, and then what was it like studying with SuperfastCPA? And fortunately, I had SuperfastCPA from the beginning. So
okay, yeah, we'll kind of go through everything, and it doesn't need to be specifically about how good SuperfastCPA was or anything. just your whole process.
Yeah, cool.
So I have your one of your your posts saying I'm done on the forum, and then down below you made some comments about 2 specifics, but we'll get to that. Maybe we'll start from the beginning. So So
Cool.
you said you had found us before you really started the full process then?
Yeah. So end of 2020 was when I was gearing up to get started studying the CPA exams. And I think it was probably either YouTube or Facebook came across an ad for SuperfastCPA, and it was like, okay, this guy, the way he's explaining it, that sounds very logical and like a great way to study rather than what I had been reading on, like Reddit of how painful it was to go through the process. So yeah. And actually I was finishing up my units that I needed for the 150 at the time. And so I actually kind of used your method to finish up some of the classes I was taking to just kind of work on looking at it differently, starting with the questions first. And so I just think, the way you teach it is so good and so helpful for really any study process. It made the end of school a lot easier, which was cool.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. So did you start so you saw an ad, did you watch the free 1 hour training thing?
I watched it a few times because I wanted to kind of absorb it. And I think I reached out to you and was just checking in with which study course to use. And then I think I purchased it in kind of November or December of 2020, and then started the study process in 2021, right in the beginning. Yeah.
And what review course did you get?
I went with Wiley based on your recommendation. I think you had mentioned that you had done Wiley. Yeah. And it was one of kind of the cheaper options. So I figured if I was going to be using your method, and I'm kind of focusing on the questions first approach, I'm not necessarily worried about how good the lectures are or kind of the extra features. So I just figured Wiley made a lot of sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, you don't really have a before story where you were studying the normal way or anything. So you, to your post here, you said, and I wanted to ask you about this because this is probably the most common, well, I think there's 3 or 4, but this is one of the most common things people run into. So you said, first, I had to really force myself to answer questions incorrectly when going through the material in the first 90 minutes. It was so counterintuitive. Anyways, just kind of expound on that, how you kind of learned that process. And
So I guess, growing up, my study process, I didn't really have a study process. I think I was weird enough, I was just one of those kids that you kind of got it right away. And so I'd never really, even in college, developed much of a personal study habit or study process. And so, and for me, it's always I never want to get questions wrong. I never want to fail in a test. And so when you're going through this questions first approach, you teach us to let go of getting the answer correct. That's not necessarily, when you're doing that first 90 minutes, you're not really worried about getting the question right, which is so hard to wrap your brain around if you're the kind of person that's I always want to get the question right, So it really took it was weird. It almost took you kind of had to humble yourself to go you know what, it's not about me getting it right and boosting my ego and thinking I'm pretty good at this. It's no, you just need to get your brain engaged with what the question is asking. And then if you don't know, take a swing and then see what the answer is and understand the connection between the answer and the question. So that was counterintuitive. And I think even through the whole process, there were times where it felt like I was battling myself of okay, I need to step aside and I just need to go through the process. And every time I would set my own, ego aside and just get to the question and try to go for understanding of what the question was asking, I always got through the material faster. And it would slow me down if I was caught up on well, I want to get 80% on this, this quiz so that I don't have to go back and read the material or do the quiz again. But if I was just kind of focusing on what your method teaches, which is just understand what the question is asking, and then let's look at the answer and let's connect the dots. The process went by faster. So yeah, it's funny that you kind of have to battle yourself on that question part of it, the question first approach.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a very common thing that comes up in emails constantly, just different versions of that. They're like, well, when I go through the questions, I'm only scoring a 50. And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, okay, I know. It doesn't matter. You're not testing right now. You should be unattached to, shouldn't even look at the outcome. Like you're not using it as it's not evaluation yet. You're using these just like the video lecture as another like learning tool.
Yeah. If I could tell myself anything going back, if I could tell myself from the beginning, don't worry about the percentage on those quizzes as you're going through the daily lessons. Don't even stress about that. And in the beginning, it's going to look ugly. And just be like, okay, great. This is the process. I might get like a 50 or even less, and that's okay.
Yeah.
As long as in that 50, you're identifying the questions you need to work on and going back over them, whatever your process is. And then you're going to, like you say, you're going to see them again in those 30 question quizzes at the end of your study process in the morning. You're going to see them again for the next however long you're studying, a couple weeks. So don't stress about it.
Yep, exactly. So how long would you say it took you to kind of get used to that? Was it just the first 2 weeks or so?
Yeah, I mean, probably first 2 or 3 weeks, you're scoring so low and you're kind of questioning, like, does this really work? But to be honest, like the podcast helps so much because you hear everybody explain the same thing of like, no, in the beginning it sucks. And then as you go through the process, you start to go like, oh, I'm getting these quizzes. I'm getting better at the 30 question quizzes. And then the quizzes on my phone throughout the day, I'm doing better. So something's working here, even though I'm still getting like 50s on the lesson quizzes. It's not a problem because I know I'm just focusing on the things I can control, which are the inputs, and then the results work themselves out over time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, well, and I do tell people this, even the daily sets of 30 for like the first 2 or 3 weeks, it's kind of the same thing. It's pretty irrelevant what you're scoring on those because it's all new. And by like week 3, you've probably been through, I don't know, depending on the review course you're using, like a third to maybe a half of the material. And you've been taking those daily sets of 30. Maybe at like the halfway mark of your study plan, you kind of start to pay attention or, okay, I'm getting in the 60s, so I need to improve on this or whatever. But even the sets of 30, the first few weeks, you're still just in the learning phase, really.
Right.
Yeah.
That was definitely my experience.
Yeah. And so what did a day of studying look like? Did you just follow the format exactly, 2 hours in the morning and mini sessions throughout the day?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, that's what I did. I set aside the morning, and like you said, I found it beneficial to get up at 5 and start my process at 5. Just knowing I work in tax at a CPA firm here in Irvine, and knowing like the rest of my day is going to be tough, and so I'm not going to want to go back to this at the end of the day. So knowing like this is my priority, number one, I want to get to this the first thing and just get started with it. So usually I would spend about 2 hours to 2.5 hours. And then, depending on which exam I was in, I was more disciplined or less disciplined, but that was my goal, always to hit that 2 hours or 2.5 hours in the morning. And then, like you model, I would work through all the lessons for that day based on the study plan that Wiley would build out for me based on when I was going to take the test. That was an important part too. I scheduled my tests ahead of time. I did move a couple tests throughout just based on like, I was just starting in this tax firm. So, doing tax prep was pretty much brand new to me. So I was kind of doing 2 new things at once. So there were a couple tests I pushed back, but for the most part, that was my goal. I set the test and it was like, let's make sure I'm getting in all the lessons each day to be able to hit that goal of taking that exam on that specific day. So that's what I did. So I did the 2 hours in the morning. The first 90 minutes, I'm working through the lesson quizzes. If there's a trouble spot, like where I'm scoring really low on that quiz, I would use your study notes for that section, because your study notes explain it really well. And then if I needed additional explanation, I would then look at the Wiley explanation, the chapter. That was always just, so dry. So usually if I was there, it took a while to get through. But then at the end, I would, like you said, I would do the 30 question quiz. And I remember actually in the beginning, I think you've mentioned this before, but I did start with like 15 question quizzes at the beginning, just because it took me so long, and I was building up the kind of the habit of like one question per minute kind of thing. Because in the beginning, you're staring at some of these questions and it's just so confusing and painful. So I cut it down to 15 for maybe like the first 2 weeks or so. And then I would up it to 30. So that was my process. And then I did use your app for the quizzes, the 5 question quizzes throughout the day. And what I did is I actually set up in my reminders app on my iPhone, I set up a CPA exam study list. And so each day I had to get through all the lessons in Wiley, and then I had to do the 30 question re-review quiz. And then I listed out six 5 question quizzes throughout the day that I would do. And then I would also have myself read 5 pages of study notes or listen to the study notes through the app for like 10 minutes. And so my goal was I want to check all these off every day. And most days I hit it. But just having those reminders, and I had them set up to go up, like to remind me at certain times of the day when I knew that's when I should do my third 5 question quiz of the day. So I would take a break from work and do that 5 question quiz. And so that was really helpful, just to keep you on task.
Yeah, I like that. Building in some kind of checkpoint that you're trying to like cross off. I've heard that in different forms from a bunch of people on these interviews. So practically speaking, because I get asked this all the time, like if you're at work at the office and you have a reminder go off, do you just kind of take a lap around the office building, or how do you actually pull out your phone and do that?
Yeah. So, especially during tax season when you're working a lot of hours, it's understood, like everybody needs a break from time to time. So I would take a break to go get water or step outside for 5 minutes just to do a 5 question quiz. When I was doing the 5 pages of review notes, I actually, side story here. One of your previous students, Felicity, who was on the podcast, funny enough, I bought your program in like November or December, end of 2020. And then I got this job at the CPA firm here in Irvine, and I met Felicity worked there, which is so funny.
Okay. And that just clicked who I can think of her face now. Yeah. Felicity. Yes. Okay.
So we were coworkers, and I told her I was using your program out of the blue, and she's like, I was on the podcast. And I was like, you're Felicity. I realized so
that is
she
so
recommended,
funny.
I know, it was amazing. Like such a small world, but, and she was so helpful in like encouraging me to keep going and checking in. But anyway, she mentioned she had used UPS store to print the study notes and bind it.
Okay.
So that's what I did. Yeah. I got your study notes bound. And so I would take that outside and walk around, read 5 pages, and then come back and get to work. So, I just built in like time throughout the day to do those quizzes. And I would say two or three of those quizzes, the 5 question quizzes, I was doing when I got home later that night, just when I was sitting around or hanging out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how it should work. And, I just get asked that a lot. Like, how do I can't be sitting at my desk, messing around on my phone for 10 minutes, like every hour. And right. I'm like, I know, I get that, but it also is pretty normal for people to kind of leave their desk for 5 minutes every hour or two. So you just kind of have to find opportunities.
You honestly probably should anyway. We all work a
Yeah.
lot, so we should probably be standing up and walking around and taking a breather. So
Yeah.
it was a good break.
And what about on the weekends? Did you just kind of do the same thing, just a little longer, or what was your weekend studying any different?
Yeah, I was pretty consistent with the 2 hours. I would probably on like a Saturday, I'd up it to 3. And then depending on if I was behind on lessons, I would try to get back on track. So yeah, Saturday was a heavier study day, but I would try to stay consistent and get up early just because, the sooner you get it done, you can have your Saturday back. So
Right.
just especially with life, and I'm married, and we just, wanting to get out and do stuff and hang out with friends and go see family and not let this thing become all consuming.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, it is a sacrifice, and it's a sacrifice for any loved ones in your family. And so I do appreciate my friends and family giving me this time to be able to do this.
Yeah. But on that note, I was going to get to this. I'm guessing as long as you nailed your morning and the mini sessions throughout the day, you could kind of relax in the evenings, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that was like the big goal. It was like, I don't want to have to study, during the evenings or in the second half of Saturday. So let's just get this done, get it out of the way, and move on. And not to say that there weren't Saturdays where I ended up studying for more hours than I had planned, just because maybe I was off schedule or just didn't have a very good, focused study session. So I got extended out. But for the most part, that was always the goal. Let's buy back the rest of the day by having focused time now in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, I don't know. You can't convince me it just makes sense. That's the best. Obviously it's the easiest in the morning, get it done.
Yeah.
And you can, just have a pretty normal weekend after that.
You only have so much willpower too. So like trying to muster that at the end of the day is just too tough. There were times where I would try to come back to studying because I had a bad morning of studying, and nighttime study for me just was not effective. It was just so much better if I got myself up, pushed through the pain of waking up early, and just got the studying done first thing.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read I think it's Atomic Habits, that book.
Yeah.
But he kind of makes the case that willpower is you could almost like consider it a myth. It's this very finite thing that you're much better off to physically remove things or like put yourself in situations where an outcome is inevitable. And instead of like trying to battle yourself to not eat garbage and work out and not do this, not do that, to just not have bad stuff in the house or, do your workouts first thing because, you have like this much willpower each day.
And a lot of it is like when you sit down to study, everything else in the world becomes so much more interesting.
That's such a good point.
You Google anything and it's like, this is way better than studying for FAR. So like trying to keep yourself on track is tough for these tests. And so like you're saying, I would remove apps from my phone. I think you recommend doing that, like replace your social media apps for a while. So that and then put like the SuperfastCPA app in their place, like on your phone. So your brain goes, oh yeah, this is my big goal, not to like scroll. I'm trying to pass exams here. So setting yourself up for success, like building your life, your week, your day, planning ahead for how it's going to go, I think is so important for these exams. It's just so easy to be distracted by all the things the other things we could do. There were times like I was just looking up like tax stuff for work, and that was more interesting than studying like FAR, BUC. So
I did a lot of historical research on like old battles during the CPA exams. Like I have to know about the French Revolution right now.
Like this is really
That's
important.
Funny. I haven't heard someone like encapsulate it that well. Everything becomes more interesting when you're trying to study.
Oh yeah,
That is funny.
everything. Yeah, and you had like a question triggers like a thought of like, oh, what about this idea? And then you're like deep in a rabbit hole of like whatever it is, and you're like, what am I doing? I'm obviously avoiding doing the hard work that I'm here to do.
Yeah, exactly. I know it is. Self-sabotage is like such an interesting thing, man.
Yeah,
I know it well. All right, so you're going back to your second comment. You said during the 2 weeks. Oh, okay, so this was maybe almost a final review strategy. During the 2 weeks leading up to my exams, I would put the audio notes on 1.5 speed and read the notes at the same time while walking the dog in the morning and evening. And so I was just going to ask you about that. So you kind of did that as part of your final review then, I guess?
Yeah. As the exam got closer and I knew I wasn't going to push it back, it was like go time for me. And I think, unfortunately, I probably learn the best when there's like a deadline and there's some pressure involved. I end up, being more productive.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my move to kind of cram a little bit, was, and for the most part in the mornings, like my wife would take care of the dog, which I was so thankful for. But towards the end, I would take back the responsibility of walking him, and I would use that extra like 45 minutes to have study notes on my phone, or I would take the bound study notes that I had gotten, and then I would pop in the headphones and listen to it at the same time, and going through it fast. Because I think for me, getting that like 30,000 foot view of the whole test, you start to really kind of piece everything together, and things start to make sense at like the macro level. Because on the daily lessons, you're so in the weeds. It's nice to then afterward like have this overview of the whole thing, and you're just listening to it over and over again and reading it at the same time. For me, there were times on the test where I could see the page, the page of what the topic was talking about. So it was helpful in those last 2 weeks to really just drill the overarching perspective of the total exam through the study notes, listening and reading at the same time.
Yeah, a lot of people do that. A lot of people have figured that out on their own, because I had never recommended that. I just started hearing that on these interviews where people would listen and read at the same time. And it does kind of lock in, I've heard this, I can't talk about it coherently like a brain scientist, but, engaging different or multiple modalities kind of like locks your brain up. If you're just reading text on a page, your mind can think about something else. Oh yeah. But if you're watching it and hearing it, your brain is like locked down or something like that. Yeah. It's just a lot easier to focus, and you can go faster, like you said.
Yep.
Tons of people have mentioned that they can read and listen, I guess, at 2 times speed, and it's just easier because you're seeing the words even though it's going really fast. Yeah,
exactly. And it's almost like you're saying, when you're reading it, it's easy to like drift off, get distracted. But because the audio is moving at such a pace, like your brain is kind of getting dragged along through the material, which is kind of nice. It's like, I don't have to do the heavy lifting of pushing myself to read through it. I'm getting like pulled through it with the audio as well. So you're making sure like you're getting through it quicker, which is, I think, good, especially towards the end. That's a good
description. Yeah, getting pulled through. Yeah. We have a new study tool coming up that keeps getting delayed. That's that exact thing, just in one place.
I think I saw your email. It looks cool. It looks really cool. That's a good idea.
It'll just be that, like in basically a video, but it'll have speed controls on it and the words highlight as they go. So it's like a little bit, should be easier to follow, a little bit more engaging and then not having to try to start the audio and, scroll, keep up with your scrolling with your finger or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I would if that were available when I was studying, I would absolutely use it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just because so many people have mentioned this over the last I mean, just through these interviews. So yeah. What about, let's see, we talked about your weekends. So how long would you leave for a final review? And then I know you just kind of described it, but what was your full process when you entered like the review phase?
Yeah. I wouldn't leave a whole lot of room for review at all. I kind of went right down to the wire. So sometimes it was like as little as, well, there were a couple times, I think once or twice, where I didn't quite finish all the lessons, but I was ready to take the exam. I was doing okay on the 30 question re-reviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been doing my process of reading and listening to the study notes. So it was like, I'm just going to go in and take it. So I guess I didn't leave a whole lot of time for a review. And I think I compensated by doing that, the audio and reading through the notes. That was kind of my way of compensating. Leading up to the exam, I didn't build in a extra week or 2 weeks of review. I would just go for it. So,
yeah.
And it would make a whole lot more sense to do that, to build in that review time. But like I said, I'm kind of like a pressure guy. I need the pressure of the exam. So yeah, I'm not a proactive studier. So this was kind of a better method for me of like, I got to push and get it done rather than leaving myself a ton of space.
Yeah. Well, and at the same time, and in fact, I think in the pro videos, what's in there right now is you don't really need a review because you're doing these sets of 30 and if you're doing the process along the way, you're reviewing everything all the time through the mini sessions and the daily set of 30. But then again, just on these interviews, I've noticed, some people don't leave any review time. They just go straight into it. Maybe that weekend cram session thing, 2 days. But then other people leave a week and, it could never hurt. But I think at the same time, with this approach, you're much better prepared than under the normal way where you've covered 200 topics and you haven't looked back at anything. So you essentially have to relearn everything doing that. So.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it did make all the difference already having that re-review built in. And then usually I would take a test on a Monday, like you recommend. And so on Saturday and Sunday, I would do a lot of 30 question quizzes like you recommend. And then I would kind of make a goal of like, I want to read the entire study notes on Saturday and read the entire study notes on Sunday. So going in, you've seen the entire exam almost, twice.
Yeah.
So that's what I did for the most part.
That's awesome. I love when someone's basically telling me every strategy back and you just, you nailed it. That's awesome. Just everything you've said, I can tell you, just followed everything to the letter and then it works.
It's interesting. It's like your process, all of the different features of it work together to get you ready. And it's like, you kind of have to let go of the A+ student thing. And you're thinking like all of these different things. It's like, you start to get a feel of like, am I ready or am I not? So as you're going through the daily lessons, that's prepping you. And then that 30 question re-review, it's like the litmus test. Am I ready or am I not? And then the 5 question mini quizzes throughout the day. Am I ready or am I not? So you're kind of gauging at all times, like, where am I at? How am I looking? Just because you're getting basically 60-ish questions a day of the entire exam. So you're really kind of getting a feel for where I'm at. And so and once you commit to that process of working the different methods that you teach, I think you get kind of an intuitive sense of like, where am I in this whole process? How far along am I? Am I ready or am I not? So it makes it easy to go, like those last 2 weeks, like, I'm going to get it. I'm going to be able to sit for this exam. So it's great. Once you commit to it, I think your brain kind of acclimates and you gauge, where I'm at in the whole process.
Yeah. And that is, like you said, you get this deeper. So I know you've probably heard me give the bike example. Like you could sit a kid down and show him 20 videos of how to ride a bike and say,
yeah,
you know, logically you just sit on that seat and move the pedals with your feet. That's how you do it. And that's a technically correct explanation. But there's the whole balance thing that you can't really put into words that the kid has to figure out themselves, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah, so watching the videos is one thing. And I mean, you kind of have to do that to have the blueprint. But then there's implementing it for 2 to 3 weeks, and you start to get that, again, it's hard to put into words, but like your own, you understand it on like a deeper level than just seeing it explained.
Yeah. If I could go back and talk to myself, I would tell myself, trust the process, because your brain is going to tell you this isn't working, or I don't understand this. I don't see how it could all work. But if you stick with it, like we're saying, you're going to see, it's going to click eventually, and you'll be like, oh, I get what we're doing here. I understand. Because even I think like I had listened to all your videos, I listened to the pro videos, and you still don't get it really.
Right.
Like you're still so stuck in your old way of thinking and studying. And so it really does take, like, in the beginning, pay close attention to what the process should be. Listen, you know, if I could tell anybody listening to this, listen closely to the instruction that Nate gives, and then build your daily process so it reflects what he recommends, and, you know, tailor it to how you study, but then like just commit to it. And don't stress about like if everything's perfect. Just go. And then like 2 or 3 weeks in, like we're saying, you're going to figure out like, oh, okay, I know what we're doing here. I can adjust. But for the most part, just commit and don't overthink it. I think that's important, because you're not going to get it right away. I
seriously might cut that clip and put it on like the introduction email, because that's a perfect encapsulation of. Yeah, I mean the welcome email largely says that same thing. Yeah, but having someone else say it, I appreciate you saying that. That's just how it has to work. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I just remember vividly, like you think you understand it and you get what you were explaining, but you really have to sit down and do the work, and it kind of clicks a couple weeks in. And then you're ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then going along with that, I think you kind of said on my last 2 exams I was less consistent, and I hear that a lot. And so what I'm getting at is you get so good at this process, and the time you're spending is so effective compared to, you know, just pouring hours down the drain watching video lectures, and 5% of it gets in your head. That's a common thing I hear from people, but they still keep going in and passing their sections, even though in their mind they're thinking, I really slacked off on this last exam.
Yeah. Totally. That's exactly what happened. I think funny enough, like I got my highest scores towards the end, even though I felt like I wasn't as consistent. So you are you're getting used to the tools, because you're giving us tools for how to pass these exams. And so you're kind of, in the beginning, you're like, I don't know how to use this tool. But by the end, you really know it really well. So you're able to use the tools effectively, even though maybe you're less consistent on maybe the time spent or the consistency of like hitting the 30 question quizzes at the end. But regardless, you have built in kind of the habit of using these tools to get through the process. So yeah, funny enough, my last 2 exams were better scores than my first 2.
Yeah, I know that's funny, but yeah, I don't remember. I think mine was maybe the same way, but I was not blowing these exams away. I mean, I was taking them really fast, but I was getting like 77, 79s, I think.
Yep. I am, I'm like 75, 76, 77, and 81. So I was just, I didn't care to be the best at CPA exams. That wasn't my goal.
Yeah. No, and it's one of those things where it's like the time to get like in the 90s would just be an inordinate and compared to just what it takes to just pass, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. This is not about winning the Elijah Watt Award or whatever it
Right,
is.
right. Although
Yeah.
it's always impressive when you see that. It's like, what are these people doing? That's amazing.
I mean, yeah, like, yeah, that's awesome.
I
You're going
do
to be the best. Yeah.
I
Go
do
ahead.
think like if somebody were to commit to using your process and like if you went all in, and I would say I didn't I didn't go all in, but if you went all in, used all your tools you teach us, and you gave yourself ample time to take these tests, maybe you might be able to get 95 and above. Like I just think like
Right.
the study method is so effective that if you really wanted that, crazy high 90s, you could probably do it.
Yeah.
But it's just
Yeah.
amount
And
of,
yeah. You know, the people scoring in like 95 plus, I mean, that's like literally all they do. You know,
yeah,
it's just all day.
yes,
And most people would take the trade-off of, yeah, I
yes,
can still pass these, but have my evenings and like
yes.
90% of my weekends still, you know.
Yeah, and I was still working at a tax firm where we do overtime hours. We did a lot. So there were weeks where I was doing 60 plus hours and I'm still
Hmm.
able to study and pass the CPA exams. So
Yeah.
um, you realize like, well, what's important here? Is it important that I get, high scores on the exams, or is it important I have, I get my work done, I get my study done, and I still have time to spend with my wife and my friends and family. So it's a great way to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Yeah. No question in my mind, but yeah. Um, okay. So let's see. One of the last things. So how did you weave practice sims into your process? Or did you use them much at all, or how did you use them?
I probably did like 2 or 3 practice sims the entire time. So I'm not the best student to be asking. And I know you say like don't stress too much about those as long as you're
Hmm.
getting through the lessons and you're doing 30 question quizzes. Don't make too much of the sims because they're always going to be different. They're always going to be challenging. And so I didn't put too much emphasis on that. I just tried them to kind of see how they were.
Yeah.
Um, and then at that point, it was like, okay, I get it. Like you're basically piecing together. It's almost like they take a bunch of multiple choice questions, stuff them into a long, big problem. And so it's not that bad if you think of it that way. You just know like when you go into a sim, you're going to be doing like 10 to 15 multiple choice questions essentially.
Yeah.
And there's steps to it. So I didn't do a whole lot of study on the sims, but I found that what a lot of people say is true, that if you're getting through the multiple choice from the daily lessons and you're doing the re-review quizzes, as long as you're getting your speed up on taking multiple choice questions, you're going to get through your multiple choice testlets quick enough to spend a lot of time on the sims. So you don't have to stress too much. I would say the one thing I probably wish I had paid more attention to is some of the sims, even on reg, I remember they have you look at like the tax code, the IRC. So
Hmm.
knowing how it wants you to do the different research of the tax code, I would recommend people look for those sims to maybe get prepped on that. But other than that, I think it's like you said, getting through those questions, the multiple choice is probably the most important thing to prep you for sims.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting good at the multiple choice just solves a bunch of problems in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the biggest thing on test day by far is leaving a bunch of time because
Yep.
3 or 4 of those sims are going to look extremely confusing no matter how many practice sims you did. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if you're crunched on time and you know you have 3 that you've seen that look really confusing, you're just going to freak out and feel rushed and not be able to think. But
Right.
if you have like more than enough time, it's a totally different thing in terms of your ability to just calmly kind of, okay, I have time to like read through this, know for sure what it's asking, and then just try to start filling it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, I think it was, I don't think I ever had a test where I didn't get through, or I think on FAR, I skipped one sim, but that was it. Out of all 4 tests, I never skipped a sim. So, other than on FAR. So I had good amount of time to get to all of them.
And you were finishing the MCQs on test day by like the halfway mark, probably, or before?
Yeah, it was pretty much the halfway mark. Yeah. And I know that's what a lot of people say. I think if you're committed to the way we do things, you're going to get through it. By then you're going to be so good at those 30-question quizzes, you're just going to knock out testlets of multiple choice pretty quick, and you're going to be ready to go on the sims and give yourself plenty of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when did your post was 4 months ago, so it's been 4 months since you got your 4th passing score? Yeah. So how's it been having to not study?
It's really good. I mean, it's great. I think, it's crazy. I finished my reg exam, and I met my wife Bianca at In-N-Out to celebrate, and I'm sitting there eating a double, and it dawns on me, like, I'm sitting there eating it, and I'm thinking, like, that might be my last CPA exam ever. And, like, I teared up. Like, I didn't expect to be, like, emotional about it, but I'm like, sitting it in and out, and I start to get choked up. And, it was overwhelming to realize, like, throughout the process, sometimes you feel like you're failing, because it's just, like, you get a 75, and it's like, okay, I passed, but it's, like, just barely. And so it's a lot of feeling of, like, so much struggle, very little like feelings of success. And if you take these, like, I think I took I'm looking at it right now. I took my first test in May of 2021 and my last one in January of 2022. So nice. I was studying for about that amount of time. And it's like low level background radiation, like you're just feeling like you've just been through some kind of awful emotional and physical pain. But to have that done and behind me, and I did what you said. I think in the pro videos you recommend writing down your why, and having that as kind of like your North Star, to really be. I pinned it to my wall because I wanted to, where I study, because I wanted to be able to see, like, why am I doing this? Because it's so hard. It's such a pain. But if you can remember, like, why you're doing it, and for me, it was like highlighting the negative consequences of not passing and then highlighting the benefits of passing. So I had kind of both things. Yeah. It was just a good reminder, because when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to remember, like, what you're doing and why. But then when you're on the other side, it's just, you feel awesome. It's like, I did this. I don't have to ever question, like, what would my life have been like if I had just passed those exams? It's like, I'm on the other side of that. And that's such a good experience to just feel free to, like, I accomplished this really hard, challenging thing, and forever, as long as I can maintain it, I have those letters. I get to put those letters behind my name, and that has meaning in our society. So, it's just it's totally worth it. It's just, and the experience of being done is great. It's just awesome. Don't have to study.
Yeah, I remember for a few weeks just having, like, a tangible sense of, like, freedom. It sounds weird, but just like, the relief was like this thing that I don't know, like, each day, multiple times, you're sitting there working and you'd realize, like, I'm done. I don't have to study tomorrow morning, just that kind of a thing. Yep. And then, oh man, something you said that reminded me of, I had a great comment, but I just can't remember. It might come back to me.
I'll let you think about it. And I'll just say, like, through the process, it's so overwhelming having to sit there and do this work every day. And you're right, like, you get that sense of freedom after you're done. But funny enough, it dawned on me because, like, afterward, I thought I would have all of this time, and you do have all this free time after you're done studying, But you do realize like anything you want to do, if you build it into your day, you're going to be able to accomplish it, which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
It like this whole process did teach me if there's like a big scary goal you want to accomplish, like build your day to be able to get that goal accomplished. And you kind of fill your day with whatever you've decided ahead of time, you know? So like when you don't have to study for the exams, you end up spending way more time on Instagram or doing random stuff or just sitting there watching Netflix. And it has dawned on me, anything I want to do, I could build it into maybe a morning routine. You can accomplish a whole lot if you're willing to carve it out. We fill our days with whatever we have. And so I think one lesson I'm taking away is like being intentional about what you do with your time and your day, because you really can accomplish a lot when you commit to a certain process, and break down from like, okay, what's the big goal? How do I break that down into daily tasks? So, just an additional benefit there of realizing what you can do if you set your mind to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of people on these interviews, again, have expressed that same sentiment, just that this process has made me realize I can, I don't know, get another certification, or I'm going to start a business on the side, like you said, just anything. And I think what I was going to say earlier about that, a big goal, there are not many things in life that are like this, where it honestly takes hours a day for months on end of like very intentional, like hard work. People go to work every day for their whole life, and that's that, but you just kind of have to do it. But something off that you, in your own time, you take away from things you'd rather be doing. Yeah, there's not that many things like that, but it's so rewarding once you finish it. And not many people set goals just completely on their own that would be something similar to this. And even my brother is a dentist, and he's in a specialty program now that he's been a dentist for a few years. And somehow we were talking on the phone the other day, and I was just telling him, I'm like, actually what I spend most of my time doing is talking to people about study methods. That's actually what I probably spend most of my time doing. He's like, really? Studying? Like, and he was just saying, even through all his dental school, he's like, it's kind of like how I did it in high school. You could just, I would study for a few hours before these exams or midterms and stuff, but, I could largely show up to class and kind of just pass. And I was like, yeah, I know. That's how I was. I was like, yeah, these exams are not like that, where, you were smart in high school and college and you could just show up to class and kind of get it. These are not like that. And so people have a really hard time with these because it takes months of studying on your own time. So.
Yeah, it is true. It is so hard to, I think like without these methods and also what we talked about earlier, like developing your why and maybe having it written down, without those things, man, I think it'd be such a challenge to do these tests. And I think that's why, like you see on Reddit and other forums, individuals who end up taking these exams like 30 times, and you're like, whoa, you mean you've spent like multiple years doing that? And that's amazing that they commit to it and are able to do it. But my recommendation is like, look for the less painful way of doing it, because this isn't high school exams. This is something totally different. Yeah. And I think the tests, they're testing you on something different. It's not your intelligence. I think like you've talked about, it's like, it's almost like your fortitude, your ability to take in like a vast amount of material and then, retains enough of it to kind of know the lay of the land of CPA world. But right. Yeah, I think like we have to think differently about these tests. They're just not traditional exams the way we were taught growing up.
Yeah. It is. It's just something different altogether, and takes a different approach for sure.
Yeah.
All right, Torre. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I loved hearing your story, meeting you in person. I don't want to take up much more of your time. But yeah, I'm glad you found us or saw that ad or whatever. I'm glad it worked for you, and congrats on being done. That's awesome.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's been great. Huge fan. I've recommended it to one of my coworkers who's going through the study process, Colby. So she's working on the exam. She bought the program, and yeah, hoping she
nice.
gets it done. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe she'll be on here too. Then you'll have two colleagues. That is funny.
Yeah.
I was doing an interview recently, and that guy knew like two previous people who had been on the podcast. But that's only the second time I've heard that. That's funny.
It was so funny when when she said I was on the podcast. I was just like, "You're Felicity! Like I know your story. That's so weird."
That's crazy. So you recognized her? So would you watch the interviews on YouTube then?
No, I did. I watched some of them, and I think I actually did watch Felicity's on YouTube, I think. But either way, I had like watched them and then I listened to them too. So I had probably listened to hers multiple times, and it just didn't even dawn on me that when I met Felicity that I had listened to her podcast before. It was pretty funny.
That is hilarious.
And it was honestly great to be able to talk to somebody else who had gone through the process, used the super fast study method, and had passed. Like just knowing like somebody, in person that I met who had done it and used it and could actually like relate to what I was going through. It was just cool to have her there to answer questions or give recommendations. Yeah,
definitely. That is funny. Sorry, I just have one kind of feedback question or just, so what would you say were the top one or two, maybe three benefits, just the biggest impact that SuperfastCPA had?
Yeah, I would say, I think without this method, you're on your own. It's like you can use whatever study course you buy, you can use their recommended pathway, but to be honest, I don't think they're thinking about it the right way. Using your method, the questions first approach is, I think, pretty revolutionary. And I actually think, like, you probably have talked about this, but it's the way our brains are wired to work in the first place. Like, we don't really attach to any information until there's a problem or an obstacle placed in our way that requires us to come up with a solution, So the fact that this is tapping into how we think in the first place, and probably the way we should all be learning globally, I think is pretty cool. Like, this is probably the right way to be learning for everybody. Like, we're as humans, we're like built to solve problems. That's what like all of life is built on. Like, any business has come up with a solution to somebody's problem. And I think we're, at SuperfastCPA, you're tapping into that deeply human way of thinking, and we're using it to get through this material quickly, and probably the most efficient and actually right way for us to learn. So the questions first approach, I think, is pretty brilliant. And then the other tools you give us, like the 5-question quiz, the re-review, those things are so important because you're locking in the concepts you've already come across. You're never going to remember what you learned on day one unless you're doing some kind of re-review. So I think those two are probably the most important. And then what I did with the study notes and the audio notes, I think that for me, right at the end, gives you that, like I said, the 30,000 foot view. You're seeing the whole test again. You're hearing it. You're reading it. You're seeing kind of some of the equations in there. That's so helpful too. So maybe those three: the questions first approach, the re-review, and then the audio and study notes. Those were like my go-tos for sure, non-negotiables.
Awesome. All right, man. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate all that. And you're quite you should be a philosopher. after, maybe as a hobby. You've said a few things where I'm like, I have never thought about it like that. That's a really good way of putting it. That's funny.
I feel like I'm a words guy in a numbers profession. It's probably why.
Yeah. There was one time in my master's degree where we were divided up in a group, and we were talking about who was going to do what. And I was like, well, these two should do like this because they're the numbers guys. And this girl in our group was like, aren't we all numbers guys? Like, we're in accounting.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, good point. But they're really good.
Yeah,
Funny.
right. I know. I have a few coworkers like that where you're like, wow, you are definitely a different kind of numbers person. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm always impressed.
Right. That is funny. All right, Torre. Okay, so that was the interview with Torre. I'm sure you found that very helpful and informative. And if you did, please take a second to share this episode or just the podcast in general with somebody you know, either a friend or a coworker that's also working on their CPA exams, because these interviews are incredibly helpful, as you've probably realized. So thanks for watching or listening, and we will see you on the next episode.